A shadowy symbol for a lost world lies at the heart of one of history's darkest chapters. The ideology that plunged the world into war was born from a secret society obsessed with a mythical paradise. This is the unsettling mystery of the Thule Society's beliefs. An obscure German occult group became a key ideological forerunner to the Nazi Party. By the end of this exploration, you will understand how mystical fantasies can be twisted into a devastating political reality. We will uncover the origins of their strange cosmology and trace the direct line from secret rituals to global conflict. How does a society's search for a perfect past lead to such an imperfect future? The chaos of post-war Munich provided the perfect breeding ground for mystical dreams of lost glory. It was here, in 1918, that a man named Rudolf von Sebetendorf officially founded the Thule Society. On the surface, it appeared as a study group for Germanic antiquity, but its roots ran much deeper into the occult underground. The society was actually a local branch of a larger, more secretive organization known as the Germain Norden, a Völkisch brotherhood obsessed with racial purity and esoteric lore. This was not a casual club for hobbyists. It was a secret society with a specific and ultimately dangerous purpose. But its true character is revealed not just in its structure, but in the powerful name its founders chose. They called it the Thule Gesellschaft, Thule. This single word was the key to their entire worldview, a word loaded with ancient mystery. It originated with a Greek explorer named Pytheas, who, in the 4th century before the Common Era, wrote of a distant, fog-shrouded island in the far north. For the members of the Thule Society, this was not merely a geographical reference. Pytheas had not just discovered a place, he had stumbled upon a memory. In their belief, Thule was the gateway to a far more magnificent concept, the lost Arctic continent of Hyperborea. This was not a frozen wasteland in their eyes, but a primordial paradise, the original homeland of the Aryan race. They imagined a land of eternal sun, where a superior people possessed ancient wisdom and godlike power before a great cataclysm scattered them across the world. The Society's mission, then, was a sacred quest to reclaim this lost heritage. They were not just studying history, they were seeking the tools to rebuild a mythical past, to awaken a sleeping power they believed was their racial birthright. This profound and intoxicating myth would become the foundation for a terrifying new political reality. This paradise of Hyperborea was envisioned as a world bathed in eternal sunlight, a realm of warmth and splendor far beyond the icy seas. Here, they believed, lived the original Aryans, a race of towering, blonde, blue-eyed superhumans. These were not mere people, but godlike beings who possessed profound wisdom and wielded powers that seemed magical to the modern world. They lived in perfect harmony with their environment, masters of a utopian civilization. This was the golden age, the pinnacle of human existence, and it was the racial inheritance of the Thule Society's members. They saw themselves as the scattered, weakened descendants of these divine beings, and their entire purpose was to restore that lost glory. But this perfect world did not last. According to their myth, a terrible cataclysm struck. Some stories spoke of a sudden shift in the Earth's axis, others of a great flood or a devastating ice age. This disaster forced the Aryan masters to abandon their northern home and migrate south in search of new lands. Their epic journey did not end in obscurity. The Society's lore taught that these refugees went on to found all the great ancient civilizations. The legendary city of Atlantis was, in their eyes, a colony of Hyperborean survivors. From there, these superior beings spread their influence, becoming the rulers and god-kings of ancient India and Persia. Their bloodline and their ancient wisdom were the hidden forces behind every major leap in human history. This grand narrative, however, contained a dark and terrifying corollary. The myth held that as the Aryans dispersed and intermingled with the lesser races they encountered, their divine blood became diluted. Their innate power and purity faded over generations. This introduced a central, obsessive fear into their worldview, the fear of racial contamination. The Aryans' eternal struggle was no longer against natural forces, but against other peoples. Their destiny was to fight to reclaim their purity and dominance against those they deemed inferior. This concept of an endless racial war, a spiritual battle for survival against impurity, was the most toxic part of the Thule Society's beliefs. It was this exact idea, this core mythology of a lost superior race needing to purge the world to regain its power, that would be stripped of its mystical robes and repackaged as the pseudo-scientific racial ideology of the Nazi Party. The fantasy of Hyperborea was not just a story, it was a blueprint for genocide. This obsession with a lost Aryan paradise did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the poisonous fruit of a specific intellectual and spiritual underworld flourishing in Europe at the time. To truly understand the Thule Society, we must see it as part of a larger tapestry of bizarre and competing esoteric movements. One of the most significant influences was a strange ideology known as Ariosophy. Developed by two Austrian mystics, Guido von List and Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels, Ariosophy was a volatile fusion of Volkish nationalism and occult fantasy. The name itself reveals its core, combining Ario for Aryan with Sophy for wisdom. This was a self-proclaimed wisdom of the Aryans. List claimed to have received visions revealing the secret mystical language and runic symbols of the ancient Germans. Lanz von Liebenfels was even more extreme, publishing a magazine where he preached the need for a holy war against what he termed the ape-like inferior races, arguing that the Aryan race was a distinct and divine species that must purify itself. Their writings were filled with a potent mix of invented history, runic magic, and a brutal, religious-like belief in racial segregation. This stands in stark contrast to another major esoteric movement of the era, Theosophy. Founded by the formidable Helena Blavatsky, Theosophy also spoke of ancient root races and hidden spiritual masters, but its core message was fundamentally different. Theosophy was universalist, teaching that all of humanity was on a shared spiritual evolutionary journey. While it described root races like the Atlanteans and the Aryans, these were seen as stages in human development that every soul would pass through, not as a basis for declaring one group of people permanently superior to another. The racial hierarchy was spiritual and cyclical, not biological and permanent. The men of the Thule Society, however, were not interested in universal brotherhood. They cherry-picked the most dangerous ideas from both of these systems. From Theosophy, they took the grand cosmic scale of history and the concept of ancient supermen. From Ariosophy, they took the virulent racism and the conviction that their Germanic ancestors held a unique, world-saving power. They twisted these threads together, discarding any message of unity, to create a uniquely German and terrifyingly potent occult doctrine. In their hands, Aryan superiority was no longer just a matter of blood or culture. It was elevated to a spiritual and cosmic truth. They believed they were not merely fighting a political battle, but participating in a divine war for the soul of the world itself. A war that required the total victory of their kind and the eradication of everything they deemed impure. This fusion of mysticism and bigotry provided a sacred justification for hatred, making their mission feel like a holy crusade. This sacred war needed its own sacred language, a set of symbols that could make an abstract cosmic struggle feel immediate and real. The most powerful of these symbols was one they stole from the world and claimed for themselves, the swastika. To understand the weight of this theft, we must first recognize its true history. For thousands of years, across countless cultures, this hooked cross was a near-universal sign of life, sun, and good fortune. It adorned ancient Greek pottery, sacred Hindu temples, and Native American textiles. It was a positive and auspicious mark, a symbol of the sun's benevolent journey across the sky. the Thule Society and later the Nazis performed a profound act of symbolic violence. They did not invent the swastika, they kidnapped it. They ripped it from its global context and redefined it as an exclusively Aryan emblem. In their new mythology, it was no longer a general solar symbol. It became the specific symbol of the Aryan sun wheel, representing the eternal struggle and ultimate victory of their race. They saw its spinning arms not as a sign of peace, but as a churning engine of racial conflict, churning forward to crush all opposition. This was not just a change of meaning, it was a weaponization of an ancient icon, turning a shared human heritage into a banner of hate. But their symbolic arsenal did not end there. They adopted the dagger as a central motif, a clear and brutal representation of militant action. This was not a ceremonial object, it was a promise of violence, a declaration that their beliefs would be enforced by the blade. The very logo of the Thule Society often featured a dagger superimposed on a swastika, a stark statement that their racial rebirth would be achieved through direct and bloody struggle. Beyond these well-known images, they delved into a more obscure mystical alphabet, the Aryan runes. This was not an authentic historical runic system, but one entirely invented by their ideological forefather, Guido von List. While in a healing trance after an eye operation, List claimed he had a vision revealing these 18 sacred runes, which he said contained the encoded wisdom of the ancient Aryan priesthood. The Thule Society embraced these symbols as magical keys. The Sig rune, resembling a lightning bolt, was believed to channel victory and the power of the sun. The Leben rune, which looked like an upward-pointing arrow, symbolized life and birth, while its inverted counterpart, the Toten rune, represented death. These were not mere letters to them, they were active, potent forces. They believed that by understanding and displaying these runes, they could tap into the hidden energies of the universe and empower their cause. Every symbol, from the stolen swastika to the channeled runes, served a single purpose: to transform a collection of mystical fantasies into a tangible, visual reality that demanded action. They were building an iconography for a new world order, one where every emblem whispered a single, terrifying command: to fight, to purify, to conquer. The man tasked with channeling these cosmic symbols into a political force was as mysterious as the runes he championed. Rudolf von Sebetendorf was a figure shrouded in self-created legend, a man whose own past was as much a fabrication as the Aryan myths he promoted. His real name was far less aristocratic: Adam Alfred Rudolf Glauer. He was a convicted criminal and an adventurer who spent years in the Ottoman Empire, a period that would profoundly shape his approach to the occult. It was there, he later claimed, that he was initiated into secret Sufi mystical traditions and clandestine Masonic lodges. This exposure to Eastern esotericism gave him a template, a model for how secret knowledge could be wielded by a select brotherhood to influence the world. He returned to Germany not just with a new name and a fabricated noble title, but with a grand vision for a German secret society built on this hybrid of Eastern mysticism and Western racism. His first and most crucial move was to use his substantial personal wealth to purchase a struggling Munich newspaper, the Münchener Beobachter. This was not a simple business investment, it was the acquisition of a propaganda machine. The newspaper became the official mouthpiece of the Thule Society, pumping its toxic blend of esoteric Aryanism, virulent antisemitism, and fierce nationalism directly into the heart of a troubled and receptive Munich. Under his leadership, the Thule Society was meticulously organized. An inner circle, a true secret society within the society, conducted rituals and made the most important decisions. They adopted pseudonyms to protect their identities, with Sebetendorf himself going by Brother Severus. They held their meetings in the finest hotel in Munich, a deliberate act to project an image of influence and prestige. The Society's membership rolls were a who's who of the emerging radical right in Bavaria, including men who would later become key figures in the early Nazi Party. Yet the very movement Sebetendorf helped birth would ultimately cast him aside. As the Thule Society's ideas were stripped of their mystical trappings and transformed into a brutal political program, the original occultist found himself increasingly marginalized. The practical politicians and street brawlers of the Nazi Party had little use for his esoteric fantasies. In a stunning act of defiance, or perhaps bitter revenge, Sebetendorf published a book in 1933, the very year the Nazis seized total power. In it, he revealed the Thule Society's crucial role as the ideological cradle of National Socialism. The regime was furious. They banned the book immediately and arrested its author. Sebetendorf, the man who provided the intellectual and symbolic fuel for the Nazi engine, was forced into exile, his creation having grown into a monster that no longer recognized its maker. The secret symbols and cosmic myths of the Thule Society could not remain confined to hotel meeting rooms. They demanded a vessel, a political machine to translate their spiritual war into a battle for the streets. That vessel was the German Workers' Party. In January of 1919, two key members of the Thule Society took action. Karl Harrer, a journalist, and Anton Drexler, a locksmith, officially founded the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. This was not a coincidence. It was a direct and calculated extension of the Society's mission. The German Workers' Party was conceived as the political arm of the Thule Society, a public-facing organization designed to attract the masses with a populist message, while its occult heart continued to beat in secret. Their platform was a volatile mix that would become tragically familiar: fierce nationalism, bitter anti-communism, and a deep, conspiratorial anti-Semitism, all framed as a defense of the German worker. To spread their message, they chose the most quintessentially Munich of venues, the city's vast, smoky beer halls. These were not quiet lecture halls, but crowded, raucous spaces where political passions could be stirred with a fiery speech and a raised stein. It was in one of these halls, at a meeting of the fledgling party in September of 1919, that history took its darkest turn. The German army, wary of the dozens of small political groups springing up, sent a young corporal to observe and report on the proceedings. His name was Adolf Hitler. He was not there as a convert, but as an informant. The story goes that during a debate, Hitler's own fervent nationalist beliefs erupted. He stood and delivered such a blistering, impromptu rebuttal to a speaker that he captivated the small audience. Anton Drexler was immediately impressed, reportedly remarking that the young man had a devil of a talent for speaking. He saw in Hitler the raw, magnetic energy their intellectual movement desperately lacked. Shortly after, Hitler was invited to join the party's executive committee as its 55th member. He accepted, and with that single decision, the abstract, mystical racism of the Thule Society found its most terrifyingly effective voice. The German Workers' Party was the seed, but Adolf Hitler was the violent storm that would make it grow. Under his relentless drive, the small discussion group would soon be reborn, shedding its original name to become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, the Nazi Party. The occult foundation had been laid, and now the political superstructure was rising, brick by brutal brick. Among the shadowy figures of the Thule Society, one man would prove more instrumental than any other in forging the final link between occult fantasy and political reality. Dietrich Eckart was not a politician or a street brawler. He was a playwright, a poet, and a deeply committed occultist drowning in alcoholism and morphine addiction. He was also a man possessed by a singular, messianic vision. Eckart was utterly convinced that Germany's salvation from the humiliation of the post-war world required not just a leader, but a prophet, a messiah figure who could channel the will of the people. When the brooding, intense Adolf Hitler first crossed his path, Eckart believed he had found his instrument. He saw in the young man a raw, untamed force, a blank slate upon which he could inscribe the Thule Society's core doctrines. He famously referred to Hitler as the tool, the drummer who would march the masses toward their destiny. Eckhart took it upon himself to be the drummer's teacher. He became Hitler's mentor, his intellectual gatekeeper, and his most ardent promoter. This was not a casual friendship, it was a calculated project of spiritual and political creation. Eckhart worked tirelessly to refine Hitler's crude oratory style, teaching him to modulate his voice, to build rhythm, and to master the pregnant pause that could make a beer hall crowd hang on his every word. He introduced the unsophisticated former corporal to the salons of Munich's wealthy and influential elite, securing the financial backing that would prove crucial for the fledgling Nazi movement. Most importantly, he immersed Hitler in the Thule Society's worldview. For hours on end, Eckhart would sit with his pupil, drilling into him the core tenets of their belief, the myth of Hyperborea, the sacred duty of racial purity, and the global Jewish conspiracy they believed was the primary obstacle to Aryan rebirth. He gave Hitler a cosmic framework for his hatred, transforming personal resentment into a holy crusade. Eckhart's influence was so profound that Hitler would later dedicate his infamous book, Mein Kampf, to him, calling him a fatherly friend and a martyr. The ultimate testament to Eckhart's conviction came with his final breath. Dying in 1923, just before the failed beer hall putsch, he uttered a prophecy that was also a confession. He declared, "Follow Hitler, he will dance, but it is I who have called the tune. I have initiated him." In that single, chilling statement, Eckhart laid claim to his creation. He saw himself as the puppet master and the high priest, the man who had taken an unstable drifter and initiated him into a dark mystery, setting in motion a dance that would soon engulf the world. The myths of Hyperborea were not content to remain as stories. They demanded proof, a physical anchor in the real world to transform esoteric belief into undeniable fact. This hunger for evidence propelled the Thule Society's ideology out of the beer halls and into the field, launching a global hunt for the lost Aryan homeland. The driving force behind this quest was an organization that sounded like a university department but acted as a sacred arm of the state, the UNSEttling. Founded by Heinrich Himmler in 1935, the UNSEttling, whose name translates to ancestral heritage, was a research institute with a singular, twisted mission. Its scholars, archaeologists, and explorers were not seeking truth. They were dispatched across the globe to find anything that could validate the Nazi racial worldview. This was science in the service of a fantasy, an attempt to dig up a justification for hatred. One of their most famous expeditions traveled to the roof of the world, to Tibet, in 1938. The team of 5 scientists was not there to study local culture in a neutral way. They were sent with a very specific goal: to find evidence that Tibet was an outpost of the ancient Aryan migration. They meticulously measured the skulls of Tibetan people, searching for anatomical features they could label as Aryan. They recorded folklore and studied ancient texts, hoping to find a thread linking the Himalayas back to the mythical Hyperboreans. They were not documenting a civilization, they were attempting to force a living culture into their prefabricated racial box. The search was not confined to Asia. Other teams scoured the Canary Islands, theorizing that the archipelago was a remnant of the sunken Atlantis. In South America, they explored the highlands of Bolivia, convinced that the ruins of Tiahuanaco were built by Aryan colonists. Across Europe, they excavated countless sites, from ancient Germanic burial mounds to medieval castles, always with the same objective: to unearth artifacts that proved the superiority and antiquity of the Germanic people. Every shard of pottery, every piece of jewelry was examined not for its historical context, but for its potential as racial propaganda. A simple comb could become a sacred relic if it could be framed as proof of a master race's divine past. This global effort was the ultimate expression of the Thule Society's original dream, a dream where mystical belief was no longer enough. They needed to touch the stones of their lost paradise to hold the bones of their supposed ancestors. For them, a single piece of tangible evidence, no matter how dubiously interpreted, was worth more than 1,000 ancient texts. It was the key to legitimizing their entire political project, turning a murderous ideology into what they could call a historical and scientific inevitability. The mystical seeds planted in a Munich hotel room would find their most terrifying harvest in the cold, disciplined structure of the SS. This direct lineage is personified in one man, Heinrich Himmler. As a young man, Himmler was steeped in the very same Völkisch and occult literature that fueled the Thule Society. He absorbed its core tenets, the belief in a lost Aryan golden age, the sacred duty of racial purity, and the necessity of a militant order to enact this vision. When he rose to command the Schutzstaffel, he did not build a mere security force. He constructed a black uniformed priesthood for a new dark age. To shape this order, Himmler looked to two powerful historical models. The first was the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. He admired their absolute obedience, their intellectual discipline, and their role as the unquestioning defenders of the Catholic faith. He wanted the SS to embody that same fanatical loyalty, not to a god, but to the person of Adolf Hitler and the racial ideology he represented. The second model was the Teutonic Knights, the medieval Germanic crusaders who carved out a kingdom in the pagan East. In them, Himmler saw the perfect fusion of monk and soldier, a brotherhood dedicated to expanding their faith and territory by the sword. He envisioned the SS as the modern incarnation of these knights, a secular crusade to reclaim the Aryan birthright. This new order required its own sacred space, a spiritual fortress for its pseudo-religious rituals. Himmler found it in Wewelsburg Castle. He transformed this remote castle into the spiritual and ceremonial heart of the SS. It was here that the Thule Society's esoteric fantasies were institutionalized. The castle's north tower was designed as the center of a new world, with a circular hall dedicated to the memory of the legendary King Arthur. Here, 12 of the highest-ranking SS generals, Himmler's own round table, would hold mystical ceremonies. In the vaulted crypt below, rituals of initiation and remembrance were held, blending invented pagan rites with the society's obsession with ancestral lineage. The castle even became the focal point for a quest straight out of medieval romance, the search for the Holy Grail. Himmler dispatched teams across Europe to find this legendary relic, believing it was not a Christian chalice but an ancient Aryan power object, a key to unlocking the wisdom of Hyperborea. Every aspect of the SS, from its marriage rules that required genealogical proof of pure blood to its death's head ring inscribed with runes, was an extension of the mystical world you first cultivated in the Thule Society. The obscure symbols and secret rituals of a handful of Munich occultists had been scaled up into the state religion of the Third Reich, proving that a dangerous fantasy, once given the power of an army, can reshape the world in its own monstrous image. But this cosmic war needed a tangible enemy, a single, all-encompassing source of evil to explain every setback and justify every atrocity. For the Thule Society, that enemy was not merely a people, but a metaphysical force they called the counter-race. Their hatred went far beyond simple racial prejudice. They did not see Jewish people as a different ethnic group, but as a positively malevolent, subhuman power actively working to destroy the Aryan race. This concept of the Gegenrace transformed a human community into a demonic antagonist in their mythological drama. It was the dark mirror to their own imagined divine status, the shadow that had to be vanquished for the son of Hyperborea to rise again. This belief found its most potent expression in a bizarre and all-consuming conspiracy theory, one that would become a cornerstone of Nazi propaganda. They argued that a secret international Jewish cabal was masterfully manipulating both sides of the modern world. On one hand, they claimed, this cabal controlled the greedy, exploitative forces of international finance capitalism. On the other, it pulled the strings of godless, revolutionary Bolshevik communism. This was the diabolical genius of their theory. No matter which political or economic system a person opposed, the Thule ideologues could point to it and say the Jews are behind it. They framed this not as a political conflict, but as a deliberate, coordinated plot to enslave and ultimately exterminate the Aryan race. In their minds, capitalism kept the masses in financial chains, while communism sought to destroy their national and cultural identity. Both were seen as different weapons in the same arsenal, wielded by the same hidden hand. This dual monster, the Jewish Bolshevik, became the ultimate scapegoat. It was a unifying explanation for everything that had gone wrong in Germany, from the humiliation of the post-war treaty to the hyperinflation that wiped out savings. It offered a simple, emotionally satisfying answer to complex problems. The enemy was not a set of difficult economic conditions or a flawed political settlement. It was a conscious, intelligent, and utterly evil adversary. This belief system did more than just spread hatred. It created a moral imperative for annihilation. If your enemy is not human, but a subhuman force of pure destruction, then any action taken against it is not just permissible, it is a sacred duty. This twisted logic, born in the meeting rooms of an occult society, provided the core ideological justification for the Holocaust. It transformed industrial-scale murder from a crime against humanity into a necessary act of racial self-defense, a chilling testament to the power of a story to kill. Behind the closed doors of Munich's most luxurious hotel, the Thule Society transformed from a political club into a mystical brotherhood. Their meetings in the Hotel Wir Jahreszeiten were not public debates but clandestine ceremonies, held in private rooms where the air was thick with cigar smoke and secrecy. To enter, a member needed more than an invitation. He needed a pseudonym and a secret handshake, a physical password that affirmed his place among the chosen. This was a world of hidden identities where a banker or an army officer could shed his everyday life and become Brother Severus or another mythical name, a warrior in a spiritual war. The rituals performed in these opulent settings were a strange and potent hybrid, a patchwork of influences stitched together to create a new German faith. They borrowed the structured solemnity of Masonic lodges with their graded initiations and symbolic dramas, and fused it with a romanticized version of Germanic paganism. The central figure in their spiritual pantheon was the god Wotan, the all-father of Norse myth, whom they saw not as a character from a dead religion but as a living archetype of the Aryan will to power. They invoked his name to channel what they believed was the primal strength of their ancestors. The room itself would have been a shrine to this invented past, likely adorned with their sacred symbols, a dagger piercing a swastika, the air perhaps traced with the smoke of ritual fires. But the heart of their ceremony, its most unsettling aspect, was the practice they called mediumism. This was not mere ceremony, it was an active attempt to breach the veil between worlds. Members would gather, focusing their collective will in an effort to contact the spirits of ancient Aryan masters, the long-lost supermen of Hyperborea. They believed these entities held the secret wisdom needed to guide their political mission, to reveal the next steps in their grand strategy. Imagine the scene: a group of educated, influential men sitting in a circle in a Munich hotel room, their eyes closed, attempting to receive transmissions from a mythical paradise. In these moments, the line between spiritualism and strategy completely vanished. A message received from the ether, a vision of a runic symbol, or a whispered name could be interpreted as a divine command, a justification for a political maneuver or a new target for their hatred. This blurring was the entire point. It made their nationalist ambitions feel like a sacred destiny, a crusade guided by the gods themselves. Their search for contact was a desperate grasp for certainty, for a sign that their violent path was not just politically expedient but cosmically ordained. This obsession with secret rituals and potent symbols did not vanish when the Thule Society faded from view. It was simply scaled up, transformed from a private ceremony in a hotel room into a state-sponsored spectacle designed to mesmerize a nation. The Nazi regime's entire aesthetic, its chillingly beautiful pageantry, was a direct inheritance from those early occultists. You can see it most clearly in the colossal Nuremberg rallies, which were not merely political gatherings but vast open-air rituals. The sea of red and black banners, the hypnotic rhythm of the marching columns, the thunderous chants of Sieg Heil, all served a single purpose: to dissolve the individual into the collective, to make a crowd feel like a congregation. At the heart of this spectacle was a concept the Thule Society would have instantly recognized: Blut und Boden, blood and soil. This was far more than a political slogan. It was a spiritual principle, a mystical belief that the German people were intrinsically linked to their native land by a sacred bond of blood. The soil was not just dirt, it was the physical body of the lost Hyperborean homeland, and the blood was the divine Aryan lineage flowing through the veins of its people. This belief transformed nationalism into a nature religion, where every farm field was a shrine and every forest a cathedral. The regime's master architects understood this spiritual hunger perfectly. Albert Speer's Cathedral of Light was its ultimate expression. This was not a building of stone and steel, but one of pure energy. By positioning 130 anti-aircraft searchlights around the Nuremberg rally grounds and aiming their beams straight up into the night sky, Speer created a temple of luminous pillars. The effect was otherworldly, a celestial colonnade that seemed to connect the earth directly to the heavens. For a viewer immersed in the Thule mythology, this was not just impressive stagecraft, it was a physical manifestation of the Aryan connection to the cosmic realm, a modern Stonehenge built to channel the power of the sun. And then there was Leni Riefenstahl's film, Triumph of the Will. It was not a documentary but a sacred text. Her cameras did not record an event, they choreographed a myth. The lingering shots of serene, cloud-dappled skies, the heroic low angles that transformed Adolf Hitler into a messianic figure descending from the clouds, the reverent focus on the fresh-faced, uniformed youth, it all served a single narrative. This was the mystical, Volkish community the Thule Society had dreamed of in their secret meetings, now brought to life on a monumental scale. The runes on the SS uniforms, the oaths sworn by firelight, the solemn marches, these were not political tools but modern enactments of an ancient, invented rite. The Society's private fantasies had become public policy, their secret symbols now illuminated for millions under Speer's Cathedral of Light. This obsession with tangible proof of a divine past led to one of the most chilling quests of the era, a hunt for sacred objects believed to hold the very keys to world power. At the center of this hunt stood a single, infamous relic, the Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny. This ancient weapon was reputed to be the very spear a Roman soldier named Longinus used to pierce the side of Christ during the crucifixion. The legend that grew around it was absolute and intoxicating. It claimed that whoever possessed this lance and understood its secrets held the power to command the destiny of the entire world. For a movement built on a foundation of mystical supremacy, this was not a fairy tale, it was a strategic objective. The story goes that a young, penniless Adolf Hitler first encountered the spear in the Hofburg Museum in Vienna. He would stand for hours, mesmerized before the display case, staring at the ancient metal point mounted on a stand. He later described the experience as a moment of profound, almost supernatural awakening. In his own mind, he was not just a man looking at an artifact, he was a prophet recognizing the tool of his own destiny. He felt an immediate, powerful connection to the object, convinced that its legendary power was real and that it was meant for him. His fixation did not end with that first visit. When German troops marched into Austria in 1938, annexing the country in the Anschluss, one of Hitler's very first acts was to personally order the immediate and secure transfer of the Holy Lance from the Hofburg to Nuremberg, the city of the Nazi Party rallies. The relic was given a military escort and transported with the reverence of a state secret. It was not being moved for scholarly study, it was being seized as a weapon of war. But the lance was just one piece of a much broader obsession. The Nazi leadership, guided by the Thule Society's core belief in hidden Aryan power, launched a sweeping, global search for other legendary relics. Heinrich Himmler's Onanab was at the forefront, desperately seeking the Holy Grail. They did not envision it as the cup of Christ, but as an Aryan power object, perhaps a stone from the crown of Lucifer or a crystalline vessel containing the primordial wisdom of Hyperborea. Expeditions were sent to rumored locations across Europe, from Montségur in France to the ruined castles of Germany, all chasing a phantom. Their search even extended to the biblical Ark of the Covenant, the fabled chest holding the tablets of the Ten Commandments. The Nazis believed that such objects were not merely religious symbols, but literal containers of a lost physics, technological or magical devices left behind by their superhuman ancestors. This was the ultimate expression of the Thule Society's original dream, to move beyond myth and ritual and actually possess the physical tools of the gods. Every relic they sought represented a different facet of the same desperate desire to find a switch they could flip, a key they could turn, that would instantly activate their racial supremacy and guarantee their victory. It was a quest to replace faith with force, to find a magical shortcut to total power, proving that even the most brutal regime could be driven by the most childish of fantasies. Alfred Rosenberg provided the intellectual framework that the movement so desperately craved. While Hitler was the voice, Rosenberg aimed to be the mind, a man who wove the Thule Society's scattered mystical threads into a dense and poisonous philosophical system. His infamous book, The Myth of the 20th Century, became a cornerstone of Nazi dogma, second only to Mein Kampf in its influence. In its pages, he presented a complete, albeit convoluted, history of the world as a perpetual racial struggle. He argued that all human culture, art, and law were merely the expression of racial soul. The Aryan soul, he claimed, was noble and honor-bound, constantly battling against the destructive, rootless soul of the Jewish people. This was not his own invention, but a systematic expansion of the very ideas debated in Thule meeting rooms, the cosmic war between a creative race and a counter-race. Rosenberg gave this fantasy the weight of a scholarly thesis, however poorly written, making it palatable to educated Germans who might have dismissed the rantings of a street-corner agitator. Then there was Rudolf Hess, Hitler's fiercely loyal deputy. His belief in the occult was not a political affectation but a deeply personal conviction. Hess was a devoted practitioner of astrology, homeopathy, and various forms of mysticism. He relied on astrological charts to make important decisions and surrounded himself with clairvoyants and faith healers, even bringing them into the inner circle of power. This was not a secret hobby, it was an integral part of his worldview. His unwavering faith in these esoteric arts reinforced the Thule Society's core belief that unseen, mystical forces were guiding their political project. When Hess made his bizarre solo flight to Scotland in 1941 in a desperate attempt to negotiate peace, many believed he was acting on an astrological prediction, a stunning example of how these occult beliefs could influence high-level strategy. Completing this trio of influencers was Gottfried Feder, the economic theorist. While Rosenberg dealt in cosmic myths and Hess in star charts, Feder provided a gritty economic enemy for the party to rally against. He developed a powerful and simple idea: the distinction between productive capital, the kind that built factories and created jobs, and rapacious loan capital, which he called the slavery of interest. In his stirring lectures, which first captivated Adolf Hitler, he argued that international finance capital was a parasitic force deliberately designed to enslave the German people. This theory provided an economic and conspiratorial justification for the society's ingrained antisemitism, neatly mapping the abstract concept of the counter-race onto a tangible, hated system. Feder's ideas became the original economic plank of the Nazi Party, directly appealing to the working and middle classes devastated by inflation and the Great Depression. Together, these men demonstrate that the Thule Society was not a monolithic block, but a network of true believers, each contributing a crucial piece to the puzzle. One provided the philosophical justification, another the mystical fervor, and the third an economic scapegoat. Their combined efforts transformed a vague collection of occult notions into a multifaceted and resilient ideology, capable of attracting true believers on every level, from the beer hall to the university. By 1925, the Thule Society had served its purpose. The Nazi Party, now a growing political force, needed to project an image of disciplined modernity, not fringe mysticism. The very occult roots that had nourished its early growth were now an embarrassment, a reminder of its chaotic beer hall origins. The order was given for the society to officially dissolve. Its public activities ceased, its meetings in the Grand Hotel came to an end, and its name was quietly retired from the political stage. This was a calculated act of image management, an attempt to scrub the movement clean of its more bizarre public associations. But a set of beliefs is not an organization you can simply disband with a memo. The society did not vanish, it simply went underground, its ideological lifeblood absorbed directly into the heart of the growing Nazi beast. The core tenets of the Thule worldview, the myth of Hyperborea, the sacred duty of racial purity, the cosmic war against a subhuman counter-race, did not fade away. They were stripped of their more flamboyant ceremonial robes and rewoven into the very fabric of the Nazi state, most potently within Heinrich Himmler's SS. The SS became the new, vastly expanded Thule Society, a state-sanctioned mystical order where the obsession with runes, ancestral lineage, and Aryan supremacy was not a secret hobby but a central doctrine. The private rituals in a Munich hotel room were replaced by the vast, chilling ceremonies at Wewelsburg Castle. The search for ancient wisdom became the global, well-funded expeditions of the Aryan. The Society's beliefs had not been discarded, they had been institutionalized, given an army and a budget. The occult heart of the Thule Society continued to beat, hidden from public view but powerfully alive within the inner sanctums of the Third Reich, proving that an idea, once it has found a host, is far harder to kill than an organization. The ghost of the Thule Society never truly left us. Its mythology did not die in the ruins of Berlin, but instead went dormant, waiting for new soil in which to grow. Decades after the war, its core ideas resurfaced, stripped of their historical context but pulsating with the same dark energy. Modern neo-Nazi and white supremacist movements have eagerly adopted this old occult framework, finding in its symbols and stories a powerful, pseudo-spiritual justification for their hatred. They do not just fly the swastika, they study the same runes, they speak of the same lost Hyperborean homeland, and they dream of the same cosmic racial war. This is not a simple political stance for them, it is a sacred identity, a faith built on the bones of a defeated regime. One of the most extreme developments from this underground is a belief system known as esoteric Hitlerism. This ideology transforms the historical figure of Adolf Hitler into something far more dangerous than a political leader. In the writings of thinkers like the Chilean diplomat Miguel Serrano, Hitler becomes a divine avatar, a messianic figure sent by hidden, Hyperborean gods to save the white race from extinction. Serrano and his followers believe Hitler did not truly die in his bunker, but instead escaped to a secret Antarctic base, or even ascended to a higher dimension, from where he will one day return to lead the final victory. This may sound like the plot of a bad novel, but for a small, dedicated number of adherents, it is a profound religious truth. It provides a complete cosmology where their bigotry is not just opinion but divine will. This twisted spirituality makes the ideology incredibly resilient. How do you argue with someone who believes their cause is guided by gods from a lost Arctic continent? The Thule Society's most enduring and toxic contribution was this very concept, the idea that a superior race is locked in an eternal, cosmic struggle against inferior forces. This narrative provides a ready-made enemy for every social ill, a simple story that turns complex modern anxieties into a holy war. It offers a sense of purpose, belonging, and even grandeur to those who feel dislocated and powerless. The belief that one is not just a person with grievances, but a soldier in a spiritual battle for the very soul of the world, is a terrifyingly potent motivator. In the 21st century, this ancient myth, born in a Munich hotel room, continues to provide a dark liturgy for new generations, proving that a dangerous idea, once unleashed, is almost impossible to erase. The most sensational stories often obscure the simplest truths. Among the most persistent legends surrounding the Thule Society is the tale of a dark ritual, a desperate summoning of demons in a Munich hotel room to magically assassinate the political enemies of the early Nazi movement. It is a story of occult warfare, of literal demons unleashed upon the world, and it perfectly captures the imagination. Yet historians find no credible evidence that such an event ever took place. The story is almost certainly a later invention, a piece of mythological embroidery that conflates the society's known interest in the supernatural with the gritty reality of political violence. This distinction is crucial. The true power of the Thule Society did not lie in its ability to command supernatural forces, but in its profound success at injecting a poisonous mythology into the bloodstream of a political movement. We have clear, documented lines of influence, from the membership rolls that included future Nazi founders to the newspaper that spread their propaganda and the mentorship that shaped Adolf Hitler's worldview. Their ideological blueprint, the core fantasy of a lost Aryan paradise and a cosmic racial war, is undeniably present in the foundational documents of the Third Reich. This is the documented history, and it is terrifying enough without the need for demons. The more seductive narrative, the one where secret rituals directly caused historical events, is a dangerous simplification. It risks turning a deliberate, human-driven process of radicalization into a supernatural drama, almost absolving the real people involved of their very real responsibilities. The transition from mystical fantasy to genocidal policy was not a magical spell. It was a deliberate, step-by-step process of ideological adoption and adaptation. The Society's members were not powerful wizards. They were propagandists, intellectuals, and financiers. Their magic was not in summoning spirits, but in making hate feel like a sacred duty and murder sound like a holy crusade. So when we ask how a secret society's beliefs led to catastrophe, we must look past the ghost stories and focus on the tangible historical mechanisms. How does a myth, once it is embraced by those in power, become a weapon? Germany in 1918 was a nation in psychic freefall. The sudden, shocking defeat in the Great War was not just a military loss, it was a spiritual shattering. For years, the public had been told victory was certain, that their soldiers were on the verge of triumph. The reality of surrender felt like a violation of the natural order, an impossible outcome that demanded a supernatural explanation. This deep national trauma was then compounded by the Treaty of Versailles. The terms were not merely harsh, they were designed to humiliate. Forced to accept sole responsibility for the war, stripped of its colonies and territories, and saddled with impossible reparations payments, Germany was made to feel like a criminal nation, a pariah on the world stage. Then came the economic tsunami. The value of the German mark evaporated with a speed that defied belief. People carried wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a single loaf of bread. Life savings vanished overnight, turning the respectable middle class into paupers. The solid ground of society had turned to quicksand, and in that climate of utter despair, the rational world had failed. This is the fertile ground where the Thule Society's seeds took root. When reality offers only shame, poverty, and chaos, a people will turn to fantasy. And the fantasy offered by the Thule Society was a potent psychological cure for a collective nervous breakdown. It replaced a shameful present with a glorious mythical past. It did not matter that Hyperborea was a fiction because its power lay in what it offered, a divine inheritance. The message was simple: you are not a defeated people from a criminal nation, you are the scattered descendants of God like supermen. Your poverty is not your fault, it is the result of your stolen birthright. This narrative transformed shame into pride and victimhood into a sacred mission. It also provided a cosmic purpose. The struggle was no longer about repaying debts or rebuilding factories. It was about participating in an eternal war between the forces of light and darkness. This elevated the individual, making a bankrupt shopkeeper or an unemployed soldier feel like a warrior in a divine drama. His personal suffering was no longer meaningless. It was a trial on the path to racial salvation. Most importantly, it provided a simple, identifiable enemy. In a world of complex, intractable problems, the Thule Society pointed to a single source for all of them: the counter-race. Hyperinflation was not a complicated economic phenomenon. It was a deliberate plot by international Jewish financiers. Political instability was not the result of a fragile new democracy. It was the work of Jewish Bolsheviks. This was the ultimate psychological salve. It replaced overwhelming complexity with satisfying simplicity. All the fear, anger, and confusion could be directed at a single, hateable other. The call to action was now irresistible. You are not just rebuilding a country, you are reclaiming a paradise. You are not just fighting political opponents, you are purging the world of a demonic force. This powerful fusion of myth, purpose, and scapegoating did not just attract followers, it created fanatics. It offered a story that made sense of the senseless, and in doing so, it made the unthinkable seem not just possible but necessary. The line between the Thule Society's documented history and its fictionalized shadow is a blurry and treacherous one. This obscure group has spawned an entire literary genre, one that often tells us more about our own fears than about the past itself. On one side of this divide lies a mountain of speculative fiction and conspiracy thrillers, where the Society's story is amplified into a tale of supernatural warfare. Perhaps the most influential book in this category is Trevor Ravenscroft's The Spear of Destiny. In its pages, history is replaced by a grand occult drama. Ravenscroft claimed that Adolf Hitler's entire quest for power was driven by his desire to possess the Holy Lance, which he believed held magical powers. He painted the Thule Society not just as ideologues, but as active practitioners of black magic, attempting to summon demonic forces to secure victory. This version of events is thrilling and emotionally potent, offering a simple, villainous cabal as the engine of history. It has provided the template for countless novels and films, where secret societies wield ancient powers and history is a secret war between wizards. This storytelling is compelling, but it is not history. It obscures the far more mundane, and therefore more frightening, reality that the Holocaust was engineered by human beings in offices, not by sorcerers in robes. In stark contrast to these sensational accounts stand the works of serious historical scholarship. The definitive academic treatment is Nicholas Goodrick Clarke's masterful book, The Occult Roots of Nazism. Goodrick Clarke does not deal in demons or magical artifacts. Instead, he meticulously traces the intellectual and social networks that connected small Volkish occult groups like the Thule Society to the emerging Nazi movement. His work is a patient excavation, showing how their bizarre ideas were systematized, popularized, and then stripped of their more overtly mystical elements to become a functional political ideology. He demonstrates the direct lines of influence through membership, mentorship, and propaganda, providing the documented evidence that Ravenscroft's narrative lacks. This distinction is not just academic pedantry, it is a vital tool for understanding how such catastrophes truly happen. The fictional version offers a comforting, if terrifying, fantasy where evil is a supernatural force that can be identified and defeated in a final battle. The historical reality is far more insidious, revealing how ordinary prejudices can be crystallized into a murderous worldview by a determined few, and how easily a society in crisis can swap rational thought for intoxicating myths. The enduring fascination with the Thule Society, in both its fictional and historical forms, speaks to a deep human need to find a pattern, a reason for the unexplainable horror of the Nazi era. We are left to wonder whether we prefer the monster in the shadows or the chilling truth that the real monster was an idea, one that required no magic to set the world on fire. The Thule Society was far from the only secret group whispering about hidden truths in the early 20th century. To understand its unique danger, we must place it beside its contemporaries, particularly the two societies that define the extremes of the esoteric world, Freemasonry and the Theosophical Society. The Freemasons represented an older tradition, one built on the universalist ideals of the Enlightenment. Their lodges were meant to be places where men of different faiths and backgrounds could come together in brotherhood, united by a belief in reason, moral improvement, and a single benevolent God. They spoke of building a better world for all humanity, a vision the Nazis found not just wrong but treasonous. In the Nazi worldview, this universal brotherhood was a poison, a deliberate plot to erase national and racial identity. They saw Freemasonry as a key tool of the very international conspiracy they were sworn to destroy, which is why Masonic lodges were among the first institutions shut down when the Nazis came to power. The Thule Society stood in direct, hateful opposition to this entire philosophy. Its brotherhood was not universal but exclusive, open only to those who could prove their pure Germanic blood. Its goal was not the betterment of humanity, but the triumph of one specific race over all others. Then there was the Theosophical Society, which presented a more complex mirror. Like the Thule Society, Theosophy was obsessed with ancient wisdom, lost continents like Atlantis, and the idea of spiritually advanced masters guiding humanity. But the similarity ends there. Theosophy taught that all of humanity was on a shared spiritual journey. Its root races were seen as successive stages in the evolution of every human soul, a cycle of reincarnation that eventually leads every person toward enlightenment. It was a cosmic, inclusive vision. The Thule Society took this grand cosmic scale and twisted it into a prison. They seized the concept of root races and froze it, declaring one race permanently superior and all others permanently inferior. They replaced Theosophy's spiritual evolution with a biological caste system, turning a journey of the soul into a death sentence for anyone outside the chosen bloodline. This stark contrast reveals the Thule Society's truly sinister innovation. It was not merely a secret society, it was a secret society that weaponized mythology. It took the appealing language of spiritual seeking and ancient mysteries and filled it with a toxic, exclusionary purpose. Where others looked to the past for wisdom to uplift everyone, the Thule Society looked to the past for a weapon to conquer everyone else. This perversion of esoteric thought, this fusion of mystical yearning with racial paranoia, is what carved out its uniquely destructive place in history, setting it on a collision course with the modern world. These architectural ambitions were far more than a quest for grandeur. They were the physical manifestation of the Thule Society's core dream, to build a new world order directly atop the foundations of a mythical past. The man chosen to design this stone and steel fantasy was Albert Speer, an architect who understood that buildings could be the ultimate form of propaganda. He developed a chillingly prescient concept he called ruin value. Speer proposed that all major Nazi structures should be designed with their own distant future in mind. He argued they should be built from massive, durable materials like granite, so that even after 1,000 years of neglect, they would collapse in a way that left aesthetically pleasing ruins. These future ruins would then stand as majestic monuments to the Third Reich, much like the crumbling temples of ancient Greece or Rome, still inspired awe in the modern era. This was not mere architectural theory. It was an attempt to cheat time itself, to force a legacy upon a future that might otherwise reject them. It was a direct physical expression of the Thule belief in a thousand-year Reich, a civilization so powerful its broken stones would command reverence long after its people were gone. To achieve this effect, Speer and his contemporaries turned to a specific style, a stark, intimidating form of neoclassicism. They rejected the delicate, ornate styles of the recent past as weak and decadent. Instead, they favored colossal columns, vast blank walls, and endless repetitive colonnades. The goal was to evoke the imperial might of ancient Rome, but filtered through the occult lens of Aryan supremacy. In their eyes, Rome itself was merely a later echo of the primordial Hyperborean civilization. By building in a style that recalled Rome, they were not just copying history, they were tapping into what they believed was the architectural language of their own lost ancestors. The designs were meant to feel timeless, eternal, and utterly overwhelming to the individual human scale, reducing a person to a mere component in a vast racial and political machine. This obsession with a mystical past extended even to the placement of the stones themselves. There are compelling suggestions that sacred geometry and celestial alignments were woven into the design. The Zeppelinfeld in Nuremberg, with its massive grandstand and towering stone pillars, was not merely oriented for the convenience of spectators. Its layout appears deliberately aligned with solar events, perhaps the solstices, transforming a rally ground into a colossal sundial or a temple to the Aryan sun god. The precise, geometric patterns of the parade grounds, the calculated sightlines, and the sheer scale were all intended to do more than impress. They were meant to harness what the Thule Society believed were real cosmic forces, to align the new German state with the same celestial rhythms they thought their Hyperborean ancestors had mastered. Every granite block was a prayer in stone, every aligned axis an attempt to channel the power of the cosmos into the project of building a new yet ancient world. Mythology alone could not sustain a modern state's murderous agenda. It needed the respectable cloak of science. The Thule Society's core fantasy of a divine Aryan race was dangerously vague, a matter of spiritual faith. To turn this faith into enforceable policy, its ideological descendants performed a sinister act of translation. They took the mystical concept of racial purity and recast it in the cold, hard language of biology, creating a pseudo-scientific framework known as racial hygiene. This was not science, but a deliberate corruption of it, designed to make prejudice sound like progress and bigotry look like biology. The term Rassenhygiene, or race hygiene, was coined by a German scientist named Alfred Plotz as early as 1895. He argued that just as farmers selectively breed their best livestock, human society must actively protect and promote its best genetic stock while preventing the unfit from reproducing. This idea of applying agricultural principles to human beings found a perfectly receptive audience in the Thule-influenced Nazi movement. Suddenly, the cosmic war against a counter-race was no longer just a spiritual battle, it was a matter of public health. The Aryan was no longer a mythological Superman, but a biological specimen of superior genetic quality. The Jew was no longer a spiritual adversary, but a parasitic virus or a contaminant in the national bloodstream. This shift in language was everything. It allowed politicians and doctors to speak of extermination not with the fervor of a fanatic, but with the dispassionate tone of a surgeon removing a tumor. This pseudo-scientific framework was then codified into law with terrifying speed. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 were its ultimate expression. These laws did not mention Hyperborea or ancient runes. They were cold, legal documents that legally defined who was a Jew based on grandparentage, systematically stripping an entire population of their citizenship and their rights. The law for the protection of German blood and German honor prohibited marriage and even extramarital intercourse between Jews and Germans. This was not presented as religious persecution, but as a necessary medical quarantine, a biological safeguard for the nation's future. But the laws were only the beginning. The logic of racial hygiene demanded more direct intervention. The Nazi state began a program of mass forced sterilizations, targeting hundreds of thousands of citizens deemed genetically inferior, including those with hereditary disabilities, mental illnesses, or chronic alcoholism. Doctors sworn to do no harm became agents of the state, identifying and sterilizing people they judged to be a burden on the national gene pool. This was eugenics in practice, the belief that you could improve the human race by controlling reproduction, and it created a chilling precedent. If the state had the right to prevent someone from having children for the health of the race, then where did that logic ultimately lead? The answer was the final, horrific destination of this twisted science. The same medical professionals and bureaucratic administrators who managed the sterilization programs would later be tasked with organizing the so-called euthanasia program, the systematic murder of disabled adults and children, and finally, the industrialized slaughter of the Holocaust. The gas chambers were not conceived in a mystical trance, but in a meeting room by men who saw themselves as hygienists disinfecting the world. The transition from ritual to ruin was not a leap, but a step-by-step descent, and each step was justified by the chilling, respectable language of pseudoscience. This web of mystical nationalism stretched far beyond the borders of Germany itself. The Thule Society was a single node in a sprawling, international network of Völkisch and occult groups, all whispering similar stories of lost racial glory. In Austria, the ideological cradle of Ariosophy, the influence of Guido von List and Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels had already prepared the soil. Their magazines and secret lodges promoted a nearly identical doctrine of Aryan supremacy and runic mysticism, creating a natural ally just across the border. Further east, in the Baltic states, similar brotherhoods flourished, often formed by ethnic German minorities who clung fiercely to a romanticized vision of their Teutonic heritage as a bulwark against Slavic influence. These groups exchanged ideas, literature, and members, forming a pan-European subculture united by a common enemy, the specter of Bolshevism. This shared fear opened some truly unexpected doors, creating alliances that defy simple explanation. A controversial and complex relationship developed with certain influential circles within the British aristocracy. For some among the English upper class, the Thule Society's fierce anti-communist rhetoric was its most compelling feature. They saw in these German occult nationalists not future adversaries, but potential partners in a crusade to crush the Soviet threat. There were shared interests, secret meetings, and even financial sympathies flowing from a handful of British elites toward their German counterparts, all in the name of a common struggle against the Red Menace. Even within the global theosophical community, a similar strange sympathy emerged. While mainstream theosophy preached universal brotherhood, certain splinter groups and influential members found themselves drawn to the Thule Society's potent narrative of spiritual warfare. They saw the battle against Bolshevism not just as a political conflict, but as a metaphysical one, a fight against a materialist philosophy that denied the soul itself. In this distorted view, the Thule Society's German-centric mysticism could be misinterpreted as a brave, if extreme, defense of ancient spiritual truth. This international dimension reveals a haunting truth. The appeal of this dark mythology was not confined to a single, troubled nation. The Thule Society's vision of a pure, ordered world, rising from the ashes of a decadent and chaotic modernity, resonated with a diverse array of people who felt threatened by the rising tide of the 20th century. They all saw their own fears and enemies reflected in the society's cosmic war, proving that a dangerous idea knows no borders, even when it wears a fiercely nationalist mask. The story of the Thule Society is a chilling lesson in how a fringe fantasy can be forged into a weapon of mass destruction. An obscure occult group meeting in the back rooms of a luxury hotel provided a potent and intoxicating cocktail of mythology, racism, and conspiracy theory. They took the dream of a lost paradise and twisted it into a mandate for hatred, creating a cosmic narrative that cast an entire people as a subhuman counterforce. This was not just political rhetoric, it was a spiritual call to arms, and it provided the essential ideological fuel for the rise of the most destructive regime in modern history. The enduring mystery is not whether they performed dark rituals, but how easily their esoteric beliefs were weaponized for political ends. How does a story about ancient supermen lead to the gas chamber? The answer lies in the power of a narrative that offers pride to the humiliated, purpose to the lost, and a simple enemy for complex problems. When reality becomes unbearable, people will grasp for myths that make them feel chosen. This is the lasting warning of the Thule Society. We must remain vigilant against the stories that promise a return to a glorious past by purging the present of its supposed impurities. We must question any narrative that glorifies one group above all others and offers simple, final solutions rooted in hatred. The most dangerous magic is not the summoning of demons, but the enchanting of a populace, convincing ordinary people that the path to paradise is paved with the suffering of their neighbors. The true mystery is how quickly a beautiful lie can become an unimaginable truth.